So morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name's Dan Stevenson. I'm Head of Sustainable Farming here at Leaf, and I've taken on the baton from Claire Mike in terms of running the surgeries with the team that I will be part of, largely our Innovation Knowledge Exchange team. We've got a really exciting subject today, one fairly close to my heart, but I'm glad to welcome Claire Whittle and James Robinson, who've joined us today to give us the benefit of their experience. So Claire is a vet and a new entrant farmer in Wales. So Claire comes with quite unique views on the impact of landscape on animal health. And James farms with his family up in Cumbria, organic dairy farm, has a huge amount of experience of farming in harmony with nature. So we're going to get two different aspects really from these guys. Both have been recognised with multiple awards. So we're really glad to have both Claire and James join us today. Just a very quick bit of housekeeping. We have a recording today's session, and any questions, if we're able to pop those in the chat, that would be great. Colleague Rachel is going to pick those up and we'll field those to Claire and James as we have time. And the plan, as usual, is to finish at 9:45. So we're just going to start off by asking Claire and James to do just a brief introduction to themselves and their farming system, their farming approach. Claire, we'll start with you, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine, mate. Hi everyone. I'm Claire Whittle. So yeah, as Dan said, I'm a farm vet by trade. So I've been a farm vet for the past 11 years. And in fact, I did used to work with Dan for very, very many years. I started working with Dan when I was a student. We were just been discussing some of the horrendous things he used to put me through. So I worked up in sort of Cheshire, Shropshire, mainly in dairy practice, so probably about 90% dairy. And then, basically switched over to farming recently. So just taken over the management of a 230-acre upland farm in northeast Wales. So the farm goes from 650 feet above sea level, just by right down to a river, up to about 1,400 foot. So pretty high up. Just got cattle for the first time this year. So had the farm for a year, got cattle, arrived in June. They're all pregnant, which is ace. So they're rare and native breeds. So I have a Rigget Galloway bull. And then I've got a combination of Angus Cross Welsh Blacks and a couple of Belter Galloways in there as well. I quite like the mismatch of colours and the diversity as well, which I think we'll talk a little bit about today. So the plan is for it to be a circular, climate resilient, nature friendly farm. That's the intention. Hopefully a community farm as well in the future. It's just me up there, so it's quite tough trying to get things done, even just learning everything. So I'm often on the phone to James with problems with generally plumbing. Actually, I've realised that farming is mainly plumbing. I left clinical practice in June, and I have my own consultancy business called the Regenerative Vet, and that sort of advocates for healthy livestock as part of healthy ecosystems.
Thank you, Claire. And James, if we could have a similar introduction from yourself, maybe with less stories about how awful I was to work with.
I was going to say, luckily, I've never worked with Dan, but that didn't sound quite right, did it? Anyway, but I'm lucky enough to have worked with Claire actually. So James Robinson, family dairy farm up in Cumbria. We've been organic for about 20 years now, but the family's actually been on the farm for 150 years. So we've got a long-standing relationship with the land. We've got a breed of cows as well that is less normal than most. So we've got dairy shorthorns, and they've been pedigree on the farm for over 100 years as well. So the cattle have very much been bred alongside the sort of landscape that we have, and they've been managed as such as well. Definitely bred for the area and the type of land, the topography and the landscape and the climate, I suppose. We are 100% dairy pretty much, although we do have one or two little sheep, but we used to have quite a few sheep. We knocked them back, and then we've only got like 20 Herdwicks now, which belong to my son. So other than that, we're all dairy. We call ourselves like a whole grassland farm, but in reality, yes, it's green, but it's not just grass. We're very much trying to increase all the diversity of not just within the swards, but then in the surrounding hedges and trees and rivers and everything as well. I'm the chair of the England steering group for the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and we see that sort of farming in harmony with nature as sort of key to our future sustainability, really. So that's the sort of farming in a nutshell for me up at Strictly. And hedges. I will no doubt mention quite a lot about hedges in the next 45 minutes or so.
Cheers, James. Thank you. And it's clear how aligned what you do is with the sort of leafier things, and already just in that intro, getting a feel for sort of the landscape elements of what you do and how that complements your approach to dairy and where you are as well. Claire, if we can come to you first and just sort of get your views on the animal health elements, the sort of animal health issues that might be impacted or addressed by how we manage that landscape. Your view as both a sort of from a veterinary aspect and a farmer aspect as well.
Yeah, so I was really lucky in 2021. I got a Nuffield scholarship to look at whether regenerative agriculture can improve the health and welfare of livestock. And as part of that, I travelled to areas like Australia, where they're experiencing sort of extreme temperatures, particularly with regards to drought, etc., in the summer. And I realised the sort of importance of landscape design there from an animal welfare perspective mainly. And when I've looked into it further, there's quite a lot about it. And if you look at like future Met Office weather forecasts for 2050, so which isn't that far away, we're talking 25 years away, what we'll see potentially is we'll see sort of highs of 40 degrees C for several weeks in a row, mainly temperatures around 35 degrees C for 2 weeks or more. Now, what happens when we get those temperatures, and that's under a high emission scenario, which is what we are currently on, and it sadly doesn't look like there's much chance of that changing in the near future. We're going to see problems with our livestock on that. So when we get temperatures that are over 35, we'll start seeing production losses, and those production losses, whether it's milk, whether it's meat, can be anywhere from sort of 20 to 50%. So they're huge when we start talking about losses associated with climate change, and particularly with regards to heat stress. So there's a couple of options there. So one option is we put animals into sheds. You know, we can design sheds for livestock, or we think we're very good at designing sheds for livestock, which can almost provide everything. So you can put fans in there, you can increase ventilation, you can improve ventilation. Obviously, they're under some level of shade if they're in a shed. But the issue with that is potentially when we start seeing these higher temperatures, we're also going to be seeing changes in energy prices, which are likely to hike up. And potentially when people start putting things like air conditioning in buildings, in their offices, in their homes, we're going to see some massive changes there in what that energy cost is. And that will also be reflected in the energy that is required for running these farm sheds. Now, the other way of looking at it is thinking about landscape design. And I think that's something, as I said, we often think about shed design, but we don't really often consider what the outdoor landscapes are for our livestock. And in a country where 90% of our farms still use grazing in some capacity, our livestock farms, you know, we are still grazing animals for 6 months of the year or more. That's something we really need to take into consideration. And by landscape design, I'm talking everything from trees and hedges. So a lot of our hedges, as you'll know, around the UK are in pretty poor condition, often cut to around 4 foot high, really badly managed in the bottom. So there's nothing that can actually provide any shelter there, and particularly our younger animals. And if we're seeing wetter weather as well, which is another potential, our younger animals aren't quite as able to control their own internal temperatures quite so well. So having shelter by really good hedges and how we manage them, which James will come on to talking about a little bit, is really important there as well. And also ensuring that they're high enough to provide shade. And we can see differences of 5 degrees C between wooded areas or tree covered areas compared to outside in sort of bare sort of pasture areas as well. And some work done by the Journal of Dairy Science was really interesting. So those production losses can be very different. So obviously animals stop eating when they get too hot, as we do as well. So when we get heat stress, we quite often want to eat less. And so that production loss can be that way. It can also affect fertility. So there's again another study in the Journal of Dairy Science which has shown that fertility losses can be pretty big. And they can also, what's very interesting is they've shown that heifers that are born to heat stress dams can actually have reduced milk yield potential for up to 3 generations. So it's not just the actual generation of cows that we're dealing with at the moment, it's the long-term knock-on effects then through the future and through those, so that long-term generational effects of one season basically of heat stress. So how we can mitigate that, one is hedges and trees. Also when we're thinking about pasture length, and obviously cooler soils, etc. So if we have longer pasture, longer swards, basically the soil at the base of those plants is going to be cooler, which means when our animals lie down on that, they're better able to dissipate their heat. Also, you know, trees providing things like browse, alternative browse. You know, we reckon there's studies that show that sheep get about 40% of their diet from browse. Cows are about 20% and goats are somewhere around 60%. So when we're not seeing browse in their diet, we're probably not seeing them demonstrate sort of more natural behavior, and also that diversity of that diet and that improvement of rumen resilience. And I use your phrase here, Dan. You will often say, like, we say we should eat the rainbow, but actually we never say the same thing of our livestock. And why don't we say that? And another great thing about a tree from a disease perspective, or hedges in particular, is for me a good hedge is 3 meters wide at the base. And when we're talking about spreading disease between livestock, it's a bit like those COVID things. You want to be a cow apart. For cows, they want to be 3 meters apart, and for sheep as well. So if we can provide not only like double fencing, but we can put a hedgerow down there, we're not only just providing of that wildlife corridor and all those wonderful benefits of the shelter and shade, but we're also getting the 3 meter wide gap, basically, which is basically almost like a not semi-permeable boundary between livestock as well there. And also for farms, I think trees can be a really great diversification idea as well. So when we're talking about resilience of farm business and bringing in that diversification, there's no reason why some of those trees can't be either edible, whether it's nuts or fruit, etc.
Thank you, Claire. You touch on some really interesting points there, don't you? That we see these challenges with respect to climate or disease, and we think, oh, we can design that. You know, the answer to that can come on the back of a lorry or something. And the point you're making, and the point I think James will back up, is actually the answers are there in the natural world if we work with them, and they can provide those multiple benefits to our farm livestock, but also our farming businesses as well. And on that front, James, having farmed the landscape for as long as you guys have, how have you seen things change? You'll have witnessed change on the ground, and how have you had to adjust your landscape management to try and compensate for those changes?
Excuse me. Yeah, so yes, we have seen change. Absolutely, we've seen change, but there's also a huge amount of continuity as well, the way that we've managed our land. So we've been here, my family's been here at Strictly for 150 years now. It started off with about 110 acres, something like that. It's now 300, but the original 110 acres, my great-grandfather, he could stand on top of the hill behind our house there, and he could look down and he could recognise every field from that and every hedgerow. We're very lucky that we've actually got, and this is actually across the whole 300 acres actually, of the original fields that were intact, that were there in 1850s, which is when the sort of first mapping was done in our area. All those field, well, 95% of those field boundaries are still intact. There's still very much a functioning boundary and a managed boundary, whether that's a dry stone wall or a hedgerow. So we've got that historic connection there and that historic landscape, but that is really, really suited to exactly what Claire's talking about with the shade and with the shelter. So those hedges that we manage them on a 20 to 25 year rotation of hedge laying. So they go from everything from a newly laid hedge, which is, you know, probably about 1 meter high and 1 meter wide. Everything from that right through to one that's potentially 25 years with not being touched from that original hedge laying, where they could be 6-7 meters high and wide. So they're huge things, they're huge, great big sort of ribbons of diversity across the landscape, really, that provides the shade and the shelter for the livestock that are in those fields. And I can remember my granddad talking about we had a farm walk here, I can remember, so it was with the FWAG, Family Wildlife Advisory Group, when it was still active in our area. This is going back to probably about 1990, 91. Yes, I'm that old. I can remember him talking, and he was saying that we couldn't farm where we are now without hedgerows. You know, he saw the key then, you know, and this is 30 odd years ago. So that benefit was known then, and it was known all through his farming life, really, as the benefit of managing these hedgerows for the benefits of the shade and the shelter, and then everything else that comes with it as well. But we've seen things change. We've seen areas where I can remember, you know, this isn't a history lesson or anything, a family history lesson, but I can remember my dad going into fields, baling hay on areas of land that we can't now even get into with a tractor. We struggle to even graze because they're so wet, you know. So there is definite climate change, you know, and it's coming at us pretty quick as well. You know, we're getting 10% more rainfall than we were when I can remember my dad baling hay in these wet fields. So we have to change the management of those fields, and we've sort of let nature have an upper hand maybe within that, but we're also trying to adapt that, and we're planting some wood pastures within those wet areas. So those wet areas will hopefully be suitable for those for the milk cows and the heifers and whatever it is to go into when we're going to see these extremes of weather going forward. So these really hot days that Claire's talking about, we want to maybe get the cows into some sort of semi-deep shade, and we'll be able to run them into these areas of wood pasture that we've created. Outside of those times, we can really sensitively graze them with young stock and things to create a nice sort of diverse habitat as well. So there's many things that we can do, even in an area that has got small fields, big hedges, and bits of woodland. There's still a lot of things that we can do to adapt.
Thanks, James. And I think that we had a question from Bob, and Bob also farms up in Cumbria, largely sheep. And Bob asked the question about, well, how do you manage those very wet areas when rainfall is so high? And you've touched on some of the potential solutions there, haven't you, in terms of recognizing what the landscape's telling you, what that changing climate is telling you, and then adapting to meet that in terms of when you might graze areas, but also how you might manage them longer term in terms of what you're planting, and sort of planning the long term.
I think to mention as well is we've done wood pasture in some areas that have gone quite wet in my lifetime, but there's other ones that were, reasonably manageable, even probably 20 years ago, that have just, we've actually just sort of, re-wet a bit up with creating some channels and some scrapes and that sort of thing, to create a bit of wetland. And that area we actually found 4 different layers of drainage within that, so like for the last 300 years probably, it's been tried to be managed by my ancestors and the people that were here before us, and we've kind of failed. It's just got to the stage where it's just not financially viable to keep chucking money at it. So we've now created a more of a wetland area, which we still manage with grazing cattle. So we haven't actually lost that many grazing days than what we were getting off it over the last few years. But that's another area that has changed quite drastically in my lifetime. But we've now decided to take that even further in terms of habitat, but still managed it with cattle.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant to see how you've sort of listened to what the landscape was telling you, and actually you're still able to farm your livestock on there, but have adjusted slightly. And does that sort of extend out to fluke control and things like that? So I'm just conscious when we're talking about very wet areas, we're also talking about habitats that will lend themselves to the mud snail that could bring about fluke in livestock. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so we, being organic, we struggle to control fluke really. So there's only one thing that we can give our dairy cattle, anyways, for fluke control, which is like Zanil Distacare. I don't know what the active ingredient in with what's that's called, but it's a white drench, and it's got the shortest withdrawal that we can get on for fluke control. But trouble is, it only controls adult fluke. So we always really struggle to get on top of our fluke. And by managing these wet areas, that's about the only way that we can do, really. So we're trying fluke and drying off, but then we double and we withdraw because of organic. That then pushes us right to the end of the withdrawal period. So there's other ways that we have to do it, and that's by keeping the cattle out of these wet areas. And maybe if we want to graze those wet areas, then we put some girl cows in, some cows that aren't in calf that are going to go fat. Maybe they go into those areas anyway, something that's going to have a sort of a short shelf life, as it were, anyways, once it's in there, and then it can go, rather than having productive animals going in there.
So understanding what you've got and where the risks are and adjusting accordingly.
Yeah. You've also done some really cool things with fencing off your rivers, though, haven't you, as well, mate, with those riparian areas, which will probably have helped to an extent in terms of
So we've installed some. So our farm, it's a real awkward shape. It's long and it's narrow, but we've got becks running through it, rivers running through it, and so cattle have always used that for water. That's what historically they've always used, which was okay when there was average herd sizes of like 15, 20 cows, which it would have been 100 years ago. But when we've got like 115 or 215 cows going down there, it's not fit really. you can't have that many cattle going into a beck and damaging the banking, mucking in the beck, all the gravel and everything that's got all that life in it down in the beck. Cows are going in and stirring it up, and damaging it. We fenced off a huge amount of our beck, our river sides, install a solar powered pump. We're still using that water from that beck and then distributing it about around our smaller paddock fields as well. Rotational grazing with water from the beck, and it's actually increased our yields really, because the cattle now aren't having to walk from their field back to the beck. We're taking the water to them, as well as protecting all that bankside as well, all that riparian strip, and it quickly changes. It's amazing how fast wildlife and nature comes into an area once you change the management of it. Someone once told me that if you want to improve the management of something, you either put a fence up or you take a fence down, and it's that simple, really. You just got to adjust the grazing on it, and that's about it.
Thank you, James. Good to have a real life situation, and in the context of holistic farm management, integrated farm management, you see those sort of moves deliver on multiple levels, don't they, in terms of animal health, production, soil management, water stewardship, pollution control, all of those things. So it's brilliant. Claire, I was really interested to get your view as a new entrant farmer, going onto a farm. If somebody was wanting to start, sort of considering what they had and what they were going to do to start off with, rather than getting onto the low-hanging fruit at this point, in terms of where you start auditing your landscape, how have you done it, and how would you advise other people start off from that point?
Yeah, well, we were, I suppose, very lucky at the time. So when I first came on the farm, I was still working as a vet pretty much full time. So obviously, it's a very privileged position that I was in terms of I wasn't relying on finances coming from the farm. So the first thing we did was actually just leave the farm for a year. So no grazing cattle. So the sheep actually came off last June, and then we had no cattle on until this year. And part of the reason for that was I just kind of wanted to see what happened, what was in the pastures, what came up. So it had been really heavily set stocked for a really long time with sheep. So just on very, very short tenancy, sort of grazing license agreements, probably 6 months or a year. That's it. So people were just trying to get as much as they possibly could out of that grass. So actually we just left it to see what came, and it was amazing just watching what happened. So it had gone from being like a bowling green everywhere, which I know, and going back to Bob's question, that really affects your water infiltration as well. So when you're on a very wet area, what you want is your water to go into your soil. In order to do that, you're going to need longer roots, and you're going to need potentially more biomass on top to slow that rain down when it hits the soil as well. So we know the biomass above the ground is going to be similar to what's below it. So if I've got long grass, I've probably got long roots, and definitely a case of breaking up some of that compaction in there as well. And then also there's that really, I'm still on Bob's question, but really interesting study in Pont Bren, which is a water catchment. And basically what they noticed was the difference between water infiltration on wet and dry areas, ungrazed and grazed areas. So the water infiltration in areas that haven't been grazed, so like under hedgerows or within woodland, was 68 times greater, which to me is just incredible. Now, for me, it's not a case of not grazing that ever, but maybe thinking about how we add in things like longer rest periods, and what those longer rest periods mean in terms of both water infiltration and that water holding capacity on the farm, but also in terms of things like our sward length. So the longer the sward length we have in our pastures, then the less likely they are to come into contact with parasites. So so that's if the parasites are usually found in the bottom sort of 5 centimeters of the sward. So if we leave those longer pastures, we don't actually get our livestock coming into contact with them. But yeah, so my cows went onto really, really long pastures when they arrived. But the great thing, and my most favourite, was that when we left the grass to grow, we basically got this massive influx of voles onto the farm. There was just there's still vole holes absolutely everywhere. Some of the grass hasn't actually been grazed for 18 months now because I haven't got enough cattle on the farm. Price of beef is huge at the moment, so price of cows is also huge. But yeah, the voles, and then because we had all the voles, it was the bird life that then came as a result of that. So we've had long and short-eared owls, we've had the hen harrier, barn owls, and for me, that's the sort of stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning. So I think leaving is great. And then we've accessed quite a lot of funding for hedges. So in fact, when James first came to the farm, one of the first things he said to me, I said to him, I was like, I'm just really worried. So I've never farmed before. I've been a vet, but it's very different to going through that whole process of actually farming and plumbing. And there was that sort of worry of taking on quite a lot of land and not knowing what to do. And James sort of looked around and he went, well, you can't make it worse, mate. And he's absolutely right. Like the way the hedges have been, no, the hedges haven't been managed basically. So they've just been flailed, including all the interior hedges. They're all 4 foot high. They haven't been laid for over 60 years. So at the moment, currently, I'm just laying hedges this winter. We've got some really good government funding from Wales to plant the new hedges in. So there's not enough hedges. There's just big open spaces. So I think previous management has involved cutting out hedges, as in just like chopping them off. They haven't been fenced off, and then they've just been eaten out at the bottom. So they've all died, and I need, because of the height of the farm, to provide particularly that shelter, I would say, for young animals. I'm more worried about old ones in the future. So the funding's covering hedgerow planting as well. So we're gapping up some of the hedges as well. And then we've also got some woodland creation grants. So there's areas where there's shelter belts on the farm, but the shelter's a conifer, which for me feels like the wrong tree in the wrong place. And also we have curlew nesting up there. So conifers provide perfect predator perches. So what we're doing is basically planting up broadleaf woodland next to the conifers. And then eventually when they grow up high enough, we'll take the conifers out. So we're just doing things little steps at a time and try and change it. But the first and most important thing for me has been changing that grazing management and keeping those cows moving on a rotation, which is great for their health as well.
Thank you. So it sounds like there's a bit of bravery there. So, James sort of summarised it really succinctly, didn't he, in saying, well, you can't make it any worse. So look at what you've got and then start somewhere.
Yeah.
On that same sort of thread, James, what are the easy wins? What are the low-hanging fruit? What, from your view, is where people can start?
I think, well, hedges for me, I'm always going to revert back to type, but hedges for me are the easy win for the majority of farms. And any farm that's got a hedge, you can improve the management on it. We can improve the management of ours still. Claire, obviously, gone onto that farm, there's a huge change of management then. But if every hedge on the farm has been flailed for the last 40, 50 years, at some point, it's going to have to be left to grow up, to be laid. Otherwise, it'll end up like Claire's, and it'll eventually die out. So we need to manage them. They need that rejuvenation. They need to be laid. And when we're laying a hedge, it's just like a coppice. That's what we're doing. We're just creating like a living coppice, really. We're just firing that plant to produce some nice, thick, vigorous growth from the bottom, which is then going to give it new life. And by managing the hedges in a better way, and by managing them in the right way, we can make them immortal, really. Which is quite an incredible thing that we've sort of got in our hands. So hedgerow management, definitely an easy win. Fencing off the becks, that sort of thing, that's another easy win as well, because there's some really good funding for anything like that. Anything to do with the water quality, the government will give us pretty good funding for as well. But just be mindful that, becks, especially in our area, they go up pretty quick and they can be quite powerful, flash flooding and stuff. So we need to be mindful of where we're putting the fences, maybe, and what type of fencing we are using as well, to allow the water still to be spread out as well, because we don't want to hold it back in a channel. So water, hedges, and getting things in place now. So if we're wanting trees, if we're wanting that shade and shelter in 20, 25 years time, and hedges actually to be, to sort of make that shade and shelter, we need to really be making that change now. And not waiting until there's a problem, I think is a thing. Trying to sort of look forward into the future as much as we can. There's some really good climate predictions available now, and then trying to sort of manage things with that as well.
So there's definitely that element of planning ahead, isn't there? But equally, and going back to some things both you and Claire have said, sometimes people can feel paralysed by that sort of long-termist. We're not going to see the benefits for however many years. But you've also both said, if you make a change, it's amazing how quickly you will see improvements there. And I really like your simplistic way of looking at it. Either put a fence in or take a fence out and you'll see changes. And exactly as Claire said, she's just left stuff alone, which I concede is not always a luxury that everybody can do across a whole farm, but left things alone and things have changed very quickly.
Yeah.
And seeing that
I think I think that's it. And it's finding time finding time to step back to look at what you've got as well, isn't it? Especially, dairy farmers, we are, well, not just dairy, all farmers are very busy. Dairy farmers, it seems to be, dawn till dusk every day. You are full on and you haven't got time to actually stand and to look. But most people have a favourite part of their farm that they will go and they can have a sit and if it's somewhere and you're bringing the cows, you're taking the dog out, or whatever it is, you can sit and you can look and you can just take stock of what you've actually got. And I think just giving your own farm the sort of time it deserves, really, to potentially change a few small management things even it's just in your head to start with, and just start thinking about what you can do.
I love James saying that about dairy farmers, how hard you work, because he calls me a beef and sleep farmer, which which I think is probably a bit unfair, mate. But I know you are right. Definitely get more lions. But I think one of the things you also say, mate, which I always really love, is you don't have to change everything at once. You don't, and actually you don't want to cut and manage all your hedges at the same time. Even if you did 20 meters of one hedge and saw the benefits of that the next year, it's going to encourage you to do more. But you don't want to be managing everything all at once. So it's just one little step, isn't it? Which I think is very cool.
I think, yeah, and yes, it is great to have a whole farm plan, whether it's for hedgerow management and grazing and everything, but it does become too overwhelming to think of everything. I mean, it's taken our family 150 years to manage a farm the way we have. So it's a long-term project, is farming, isn't it? But we change stuff all the time. We change stuff every week, every month. So just be flexible in your approach as well, I think, isn't it? And be brave. I think, like Claire is, you can just go out of your comfort zone a little bit and not worry about what your neighbours might be thinking about. Oh, why has he left that hedge there? He usually trims all his hedges, So just doing things that's right for your farm and not worrying about what other people are thinking.
The key word you said there, James, I think, was flexible. And I was going to talk about the mindset element of it. So being adaptable and flexible, but you said exactly that. So it's not feeling, right, I've got to change my approach to everything. I've got to change it overnight. It's about, well, what my step change is going to be and what's my mindset going to be that facilitates that sort of adaptability, the sort of willingness to have a look at what you're being told by the landscape. So, all right, well, I'm going to change that plan, or I'm going to do something different there than I've done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, every year we do, as all keepers of livestock, we do a herd health plan or a flock health plan or whatever it is, and it tends to sit on a shelf and we never look at it. And that's the reality of it. And the amount of time that goes into it is ridiculous, and effort, and then it sits on the shelf and stuff as well. And that's whether that's because it's in writing, and I don't know. So I think but then all through that year we'll be changing things. We'll be adapting and stuff as well. So yes, you might have a plan, and you might have a farm plan and a whole farm plan of how you want to do it, but it isn't set in stone, just like your herd health plan isn't set in stone either. So just even if you have got it written down and you're on a scheme, whatever it is, just be really, really flexible with it.
That's something Dan always used to say, mate. Actually, that's just reminded me, like, we would go out and do your herd health plan, but you're constantly with farmers all the time changing things. So actually just having that plan, which is written down and then goes onto a shelf somewhere, is kind of more of a frustration than anything else. It does have to be written down somewhere, and that's the point of it. But it's that ongoing, very small changes and increments over time that make the difference, not just, And the overwhelm is, I definitely try and quieten the voice inside of me a lot now. That is like, you are one person and this is all, you can only do this on that day, which is always less than I thought I was going to be able to do as well.
The best plans have scribbles all over them. They're thumbed loads. They got loads of crossing out. They're written by the people who it applies to, rather than being something big and flash that looks very nice and gathers dust, whatever plan that is. We had a question from Will. And this is, Will, apologies if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but this is regarding sort of integration of livestock into wider systems. And we know the benefits that can convey, but sometimes the challenge can be convincing the supply chain of that, or we might hear that the supply chain is aware of the benefits of some of the changes that may be being made, but are worried about some of the potential negative aspects of that. And so in Will's case, that's looking at growing root crops and integrating livestock into that rotation, but concerns being from some of the retailers about the worries that might provide or otherwise might present or otherwise to food safety. It's probably a wider question about how do we work with people across the supply chain to really communicate the benefits of what you're doing. That's probably easier in some of the aspects regarding landscape, although looking at reducing numbers to ease grazing pressure could be an example that might negatively impact on supply chains. But how do you think we work across all of the supply chain to convey some of these benefits and to open up some of those discussions and remove some of the concerns?
think that's up to us to a certain extent to do that as well. So I would encourage, was it Will, to just have a conversation and ask what those concerns are to start with, and potentially if there's other supermarkets you're working with that don't have those concerns. But I think also being quite positive about it. So, the benefits of having livestock now on arable systems as well is just becoming more and more dramatic, and we're seeing that across the board. So I'd say opening up those conversations, having a chat about it and seeing, and also the type of farming that you're doing as well. I'm not entirely sure where you're at, but obviously I think there's some concerns as well about residues and things. So again, the way I'm trying to farm is trying to reduce things like parasite control. So trying to use as little wormers as possible, which can have effects on the soil. So I would say thinking about the ways that we're farming, trying to reduce the need for sort of external inputs in our animals, which would actually probably have more of an effect. And also remembering that manure and dung is literally our best fertilizer. It has your sort of your NP and K in the exact quantities to make grass and to make vegetables grow. It's kind of like nature knew what it was doing. So I think there's some onus on that and us, and maybe even like Leaf as well, to explain some of those benefits of having those livestock in those systems.
Yeah, thanks. I think I would very much say we fit in there. What I've discovered is if you get people out on farm, if you show them what's being done and the benefits, and actually have some of those concerns are either not real or they're mitigated against, people all from wherever they are in the supply chain of the industry, they leave much more positive and equipped with all of that information, and go and show people who's doing something in that sphere, and it does make a huge change. James, do you work fairly closely with the processors and retailers, and do they come out and see what you're doing on farm?
So we are currently with Organic Herd. So they were previously called Omscore. So they're the largest solely organic milk supplier in the country. Prior to that, we were with Utree. And Utree didn't give a monkey's about it. As long as the milk came in, they were quite happy, and it had a red tractor assurance with it or an organic certificate with it. But then we did momentarily switch with Muller when Muller bought Utree, and they were going to do a huge amount more really. But for one reason or another, we've now moved to Organic Herd. They were much more aligned with what we wanted to do as an organic farmer. But they are very we have the organic certification, which is obviously it gets you to a limit, gets you to a point, not to a limit. It gets you to a point of certification where you have ticked all the boxes, and then you can forget about it, nearly almost like your herd health plan. You can nearly forget about your inspection for a year then. So you've got all the paperwork, everything's all up to date, and you've got past that, and you've met all the standards. And then you don't really have to worry about doing anything else then for the next year. Yes, of course, you've got all your standards to meet. I'm going slightly off topic here, but because it's organic and because it's certified, I sometimes think that we get to a certain level where we don't then push on and go further. Whereas in a regenerative system, and regen is often used maybe more than it should be in terms of labeling. But on a regenerative system, I don't think there is that. There isn't that ceiling. You can always be more regenerative. You can always put more back into your farm. So yes, organic is great, and we've got obviously the involvement from the Organic Herd. But I sometimes think that as a certification, it does set that ceiling of where you're at, and then you don't need to go any further. Whereas regen, in terms of your mindset and everything as well, it means that you can just keep going further and further. But one thing we have done on farm, we are starting to bottle our own milk. It's still a few weeks away, unfortunately, just with one or two teething problems. We've been installing this kit for about 12 months now, and I've converted a building and all that. And that has come from people really almost consumer pressure. I don't want to call it consumer pressure, but consumers asking us, where can I buy your milk? Where can I support the way you're farming? Do you do cheese? Do you do butter? All that sort of stuff. And we've had to sort of say, well, it goes on a wagon and we don't really know where it goes after that. So I've been able to supply something that consumers can then support us directly. It's been a huge step for us. Once we actually get some milk out the door, it'll be even better. But that has been supported. partly by Booths supermarket, they've got like 27 stores in the northwest. They don't like to call themselves supermarket, Booths grocers, but they love the way that we found, and they wanted to get our milk on their shelves. So that again was I suppose the supply chain, and the supply chain is a consumer, and it's the grocer, it's the supermarket. They've actually come to us and like the way that we're farming. So it can work both ways. You know, they've been very, very supportive. But that's because we're farming hopefully in the right way, at a reasonably small scale still. But it's great to be able to put that milk on the shelf. I didn't answer your question at all there, but there we go.
Well, there was some bits in there, I think, in terms of that continuous improvement element. So not reaching a ceiling and then stopping, but always seeing how you can push forward. And that will be, in terms of summary, that starts off with starting small, doesn't it? Auditing what you've got, working with what you've got, and listening to the landscape. And then also it's those long-term relationships. And so in answer to Will's question as well, I think it's getting people out. And there is retailers, Booths in your example, other retailers as well, who are looking at those longer-term relationships and support and aligning themselves with growers and producers who are doing what they want longer term. And it's having those conversations, getting them out and seeing it. So
I think that's absolutely key. Getting people out onto the farm and it's seeing, and being open, getting our, not opening our farm gates to everybody necessarily, but it's just been really open as farmers, really showing people what we do, and that people might be people in your local area that have never really understood really what's happening on the side of the hedge. So getting them onto the farm locally, so the community's involved in our farms. Getting groups that don't get a chance to come out onto farms as well, from in a city or even in local towns, because local towns often don't get out onto farms either. But then getting other larger groups like retailers, NGOs, all that sort of stuff onto farm. They all want the opportunity. They all really value the opportunity to get out onto farms, to see what we do, and they will be amazed at the amount of amazing stuff that happens on farms all across the country. But they just need the chance to be able to see it.
Definitely. Thank you, James. And sort of Open Farm Sunday 20th anniversary 2026. Good opportunity to start small with a load of support. But yeah, it's been great. And 45 minutes has absolutely flown by, as it always does. So thank you to Claire and thank you to James. Great to hear what you're both doing. It sort of definitely made me want to get up and see your place, James. And at some point, Claire, I will make it to your farm as well. Our next surgery is on Friday the 9th of Jan. I'm aware there's big conferences going on at that point as well, but that will be looking at end uses for pulses grown on farm as part of rotations. I've also been given a nudge by James and Claire. On the 10th of January, those guys have a hedge laying course up at James's farm as well. Been reliably informed that's a great last minute gift. Rachel has also popped a link in the chat just for any areas you might like us to cover in surgeries. We've got quite a lot on the list for 2026, but if there's anything you'd like us to look into as well. But thank you all for joining us. Have a great festive period. Hope the weather's kind, and yeah, we'll see you all in 2026.